Hello! So we're just going to go and collect some moss. Moss generally grows in damp and wet conditions because they're sort of the bridge between algae and land planting. They're sort of an ancient link between the two. I came down here the other day and there's a little stream and I saw a lot of moss, so I'm going to grab some. These are ideal conditions for most types of moss to be growing. It's damp and moist. There's a stream right there, as you can see. It gets a lot of dappled sunlight, so it's not just totally in the dark. As you can see on these trees here, it is very abundant, which is what you need. You don't need a lot. All you need is a plastic container, and you can just use your hands because it just sits on the surface, because moss doesn't have roots, it doesn't dig in. But you can also use just like a little spatula or a little plant label like me just to help lift it off. This is a good little patch here. There we go. That's coming off really easily. Look. Good little patch. Sometimes moss will acclimate better, particularly if it's growing on wood, if you take a little bit of the wood with it. Like this bit's come off pretty easy. So it's still growing on that, and then it can eventually sort of spread out across anything else that you're trying to grow it on. Moss will basically grow on anything if it's damp and moist. So there's some on the ground here as well. So here we go. I've got a couple little tubs of some local moss. It's really important to not just go in and take the whole lot, because it's really intrinsic to the ecosystem. There's little insects that live in it. It helps to break things down. It's just really important, so don't just go and take the whole lot. Only take what you need, and if there's an abundance of it. And that way, if you ever need any more in the future, you know where to go. Just in time, it's just started chucking it down, so let's go. Now that I've got the moss home, I'm going to put it in some spring water, or you can use filtered tap water, but I'm just going to use this because I've got it to hand. Try and get as much of the debris and little critters out as I can. This is just natural spring water, and so I'm just going to add the moss. I would recommend only using things like filtered water or spring water, because tap water has a lot of chlorine and other chemicals in it, which moss is going to be very sensitive to. So now that we've got that soaking, I'm going to continue with the other bits that we need to do. I've got some normal gravel, just garden gravel, and I'm going to add that as a small thin layer into the bottom of this. It's just so that when we add water, it's got somewhere to drain without letting the soil become too waterlogged. Next thing we need is some mesh. I'm just using some garden weed liner mesh. This is just so that when we water it, the water can run through this and not take loads of soil with it, and then that water can sit in amongst the gravel and start off the water cycle. I have cut around the shape of the box, leaving just a little bit of overlap. There we go. And then we're just going to lay this layer of mesh on top of the gravel drainage, like that. And then you can see the overlap sort of goes to the side and tucks up a little bit, and that's just so that no soil can drain down into the gravel. Next we need a thin layer of activated charcoal. This will just help cut down on any excess moisture, and it also helps to purify the environment in there and stop it from stinking or collecting anything disgusting. We don't need a lot, just a thin layer really. That should be enough. And then the last thing that we need to put in here is some soil. You can also use Coca-Cola or a mix of that, You can make your own mix, but I'm just going to use this because I've got it to hand. Now again, you don't really need a massive layer of this. Because moss doesn't have roots, it's not going to climb down through it, it's just going to sit on the surface. Push it down quite firm. There we go. So now that we've done our propagator, I'm going to move the moss between these two buckets of water just to try and get rid of as much debris as I can. Just gonna swish it out a bit, try and get some dirt out. So now that I've cleaned the moss as much as I can, I'm just going to spray the soil mixture with some spring water, just so that when I put the moss in, it's got a nice moist surface to latch onto. And now we can start putting our moss in. There we go. Nice and full. Now that should be quite happy in there with any luck. Just gonna give it a little spray. And then we can put the lid on. Now, keep that somewhere that's not totally in direct hot sunlight, somewhere a bit shady, and make sure that it stays moist. But the water that we've added and the drainage layer should keep it in a cycle, so it should be able to just sort of keep itself going. But if you do notice it getting a bit dry, just give it a little spray every now and then. And I can use this to harvest some moss for any little projects that I might be doing.